Okay, picture this. One of the most remote spots on the planet, Rapa Nui, Easter Island.
Right. Middle of nowhere, basically.
And on this island, there's this huge mystery. It's locked away in these old wooden tablets. A script completely unique that we can't really read it today.
It's one of those historical puzzles. Has fascinated people, scholars for over a century now?
Exactly. It feels like this voice from way back, but we can't quite make out what it's saying.
The language is silent, yeah.
So we've looked through the source material you shared on this. We're digging into the Rongorongo script itself, what it is, where it might have come from. And then there's this other layer, this really fascinating, maybe kind of wild idea.
A Mu connection.
Yeah, the speculative link to a legendary lost continent, Mu.
It definitely sparks a lot of debate, that part. Some really imaginative theories out there, pushing the edges of what we think we know about history and language.
And that's what we want to explore here. We're going through the sources, trying to pull out the key insights to help you get a handle on this really complex puzzle.
I have to say, the whole idea of this script, totally isolated, it's captivating.
Oh, absolutely. It's got all the ingredients of a classic mystery. And, the sources show that even setting aside the whole lost continent idea, which is very debated, the actual story of the script itself, its existence, how the knowledge was lost, that's compelling enough on its own.
Okay, let's dive in then. Rongorongo appearing on the world stage. The sources are clear. This script is only found on Easter Island. Nowhere else.
And that isolation is key. The material really stresses that point. How does such a complex system pop up in a place like that? It's pretty extraordinary.
It wasn't until 1864 that outsiders really documented it, right?
Yeah, a French missionary, Eugene Ayrot, he's the first one credited with reporting it.
And he saw these wooden boards, tablets covered in symbols.
Hieroglyphic-like characters, he called them. But here's the really sad part the sources highlight. The timing was just awful.
Exactly. By the time other Europeans arrived and got interested, most of the Rapa Nui who could actually read or interpret these things, they were gone, or the tradition was broken.
Why? What happened?
Major cultural disruptions, disease, Peruvian slave raids. It devastated the population and shattered their social structure. That knowledge, that chain of teaching someone how to read Rongorongo, it just snapped.
So the key, the living knowledge, vanished almost as soon as the script was noticed by the outside world.
Pretty much.
Yes.
And that absence of anyone who could just tell us what it means, that's the core reason it's still undeciphered. A huge challenge.
Speaking of challenges, let's talk about just reading the things. Physically, it wasn't simple, apparently.
No, not at all. They're mostly on wood, these tablets, but you also see inscriptions on ceremonial staffs, other objects too. The carving itself looks really meticulous based on the sources.
And the glyphs are in rows.
Yeah.
But reading them isn't like reading this script.
Not even close. The sources explain this really unusual system. It's called reverse boustrophedon.
Okay, break that down. Boustrophedon, I kind of know.
Yeah.
Like an ox plowing a field back and forth.
Sort of, yeah. So you read the first line, maybe left to right, standard enough.
Okay.
But then for the next line, you don't just drop down and keep going left to right. You read it right to left.
Okay, back the other way.
And this is the really strange part. The glyphs on that second line are upside down compared to the first line.
Wait, literally inverted?
Yes, completely flipped. So to read that second line properly, you'd finish the first line, then you have to physically rotate the tablet 180 degrees.
Turn it upside down.
Right. Then read the second line, right to left. Then for the third line, you flip it back again, read left to right.
Wow. So you're constantly turning the tablet over and back.
Exactly. It requires this constant handling of the object. It's unlike any other reading system we know.
That's just incredible. It really drives home how unique, how potentially self-contained this whole system was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what are these symbols? There are hundreds of them, right? What do they actually show?
The sources say it's a real mix. You get these stylized human figures, lots of animals, birds and fish seem pretty common.
Okay.
Then celestial things, like maybe suns or moons, plants, various geometric shapes, and then a lot of forms that are just abstract, hard to pin down.
Is it obvious what they represent? Like, does a bird shape just mean bird?
That's the problem. Sometimes, maybe. Some glyphs look kind of representational. You might squint and say, yeah, that looks like a bird.
Uh-huh.
But many others are super stylized, almost like shorthand, or they're purely abstract designs. It's really hard to know if a symbol stands for a whole word, a sound, an idea, maybe something else entirely.
Without that context.
Without the context, which we lost, telling the difference is guesswork, really, which leads right into the big issue. trying to crack the code.
And the sources are blunt about this. Rongorongo is still undeciphered, full stop.
Yep. Despite a lot of effort, people have thrown linguistics at it, cryptography, symbolic analysis, you name it.
But the big stumbling block, as the material points out, is no Rosetta Stone, right?
Exactly. There's no bilingual text, no inscription with the same message in Rongorongo and, say, Spanish or Tahitian or any known language. We don't have that key, that parallel text to unlock it.
So without being able to read it directly, what do the scholars think it might be about? Educated guesses?
Educated guesses is the right term, based on patterns, the kinds of things other cultures record. The sources mention possibilities like genealogies, maybe tracking family lines,
Makes sense.
or recording important historical events, myths, maybe religious chants or prayers. Some even suggest astronomical records, tracking stars or seasons, things vital to a society.
But then there's that other idea you mentioned from the sources.
Yeah.
That maybe it's not writing in the way we think of writing.
Right, the mnemonic device theory. This is a fascinating possibility. The idea is that the symbols aren't meant to be read out loud word for word, directly transcribing speech.
That's like cue cards?
Kind of, yeah. Sophisticated visual cues. They might trigger the memory of a trained chanter or storyteller, helping them recall long, complex oral traditions, epics, histories, ritual texts.
So it wouldn't be a language to translate exactly, but more like a memory system.
A complex memory aid. That's the insight from that theory. And it would explain some of the odd features, perhaps.
Okay, so Rongorongo itself, isolated, complex, baffling. But then the story takes this sharp turn into something even more speculative. Let's bring in the second player here, the legendary continent of Mu.
Now we're stepping into a different kind of territory. More speculative history, esoteric ideas, popularized really back in the late 19th, early 20th century. Figures like Augustus Le Plongeon, James Churchward, they wrote a lot about Mu.
Yeah, Mu is supposed to be, what exactly, a lost continent?
That's the hypothesis, a massive landmass, supposedly in the Pacific Ocean.
Okay. Where Atlantis is usually put in the Atlantic, Mu is Pacific.
Generally, yes. And the idea was it was home to this incredibly advanced civilization, way older than Egypt or Sumeria.
And what happened to it? Big surprise.
It sank catastrophically, disappeared beneath the waves.
Right. And a theory connects this to Easter Island. How?
The hypothesis is that when Mu went down, some survivors managed to escape. They scattered across the Pacific, carrying bits of their culture, their knowledge.
And they might have ended up on remote islands.
Yeah.
Like Easter Island.
Potentially, yes, bringing with them remnants of their civilization, which, according to this theory, could include things like the Rongorongo script.
Okay, so that's the framework. Now, the sources we looked at mentioned a few specific arguments proponents used to bridge Rongorongo and Mu. What's the first one?
One point is about symbolic parallels. People look at some of the Rongorongo glyphs, those abstract human figures, the animal shapes, and they suggest these echo symbols supposedly linked to Mu.
Where do these Mu symbols come from?
Mostly from those esoteric writings by Churchward and others. They described Mu iconography as representing, deep connections between humans, nature, cosmic forces, that kind of thing.
So proponents see similar themes or shapes in Rongorongo and say, that looks like Mu.
Basically, yes. A visual or thematic resonance.
But it sounds pretty subjective. Are these parallels really clear-cut?
That's the major criticism for mainstream scholars. The parallels often feel quite forced, and you're comparing an undeciphered script with descriptions of symbols from unverified, highly speculative texts about Mu. It's tenuous.
Okay. What's the next point connecting them?
Geography comes up.
Yeah.
Easter Island is incredibly isolated, right out in the middle of the Pacific.
Yeah.
So the argument goes, if a continent did sink in the Pacific, wouldn't remote islands like Rapa Nui be logical places for survivors to end up, maybe a last outpost?
It fits the narrative geographically if you accept the premise of Mu existing and sinking there.
It provides a potential geographical link, however speculative.
And the third point, something about local legends.
Right. This connects to Rapa Nui oral traditions. The sources note that the islanders themselves have legends about their ancestors arriving from another homeland called Hiva.
Okay.
And sometimes these legends describe Hiva as being submerged or destroyed by a cataclysm.
So proponents hear submerged homeland and think Mu.
Exactly. They suggest these local Rapa Nui legends might be a kind of folk memory, a distorted echo of the actual sinking of Mu, and that perhaps Rongorongo relates to preserving that memory.
Okay, so symbolic parallels, geographic possibility, and echoes in local myths. Those seem to be the main pillars of the Rongorongo-Mu connection theory.
As presented by its proponents, yes.
Now, let's bring in the reality check. What does mainstream science, archaeologists, linguists make of all this?
Pretty much universal skepticism. The scientific consensus is strongly against the Mu connection. Dismissive might be too strong a word, but it's not taken seriously in mainstream academic circles.
Let's start with Mu itself. Is there any actual evidence for a lost continent in the Pacific?
No. The sources are clear on this, and it matches general scientific understanding. There's just no credible geological evidence. Our understanding of plate tectonics doesn't allow for a continent-sized landmass to just sink like that in the Pacific within a time frame relevant to human civilization.
So geologically, Mu itself is considered highly improbable, bordering on impossible.
That's the scientific view, yes.
Okay, so if Mu likely didn't exist, the connection to Rongorongo is kind of moot. But what are the arguments specifically against linking the script to any external lost civilization like Mu?
The dominant view in scholarship, as reflected in the material, is that Rongorongo is almost certainly an indigenous invention. It developed on Easter Island.
A unique achievement of the Rapa Nui people themselves.
Exactly. A remarkable intellectual feat, likely evolving out of existing Polynesian traditions of symbols, art, maybe memory aids, but taking a unique turn on the island itself, not imported from some lost super civilization.
What about those similarities across the Pacific that Mu proponents point to? If it wasn't Mu survivors spreading them, then what?
Mainstream science has a much simpler explanation: contact and exchange. Polynesians were incredible navigators. They sailed vast distances, settled islands across the Pacific,
Right.
so shared artistic motifs, cultural practices, symbols. These are much more likely the result of trade, migration, shared ancestry, and ongoing cultural exchange between island communities over centuries.
You don't need a sunken continent to explain why people who sailed all over the Pacific might share some cultural traits.
Precisely. Widespread maritime interaction explains it much more parsimoniously.
So wrapping this all up, where does this leave us with Rongorongo? We seem to have two very different stories.
We do. The sources essentially lay out these two paths. Path 1, strongly supported by evidence and scientific consensus. Rongorongo is a unique, isolated, brilliant creation of the Rapa Nui people, tragically undeciphered due to historical circumstances.
Okay.
Path 2, highly speculative, lacking empirical evidence. Rongorongo is a relic, a faint echo of a lost, highly advanced civilization like Mu, carried to Easter Island by survivors.
And the critical point either way is that we still can't read it.
Absolutely critical. Because it remains undeciphered, it leaves room for mystery, for speculation. It keeps both the scientific puzzle and the more, shall we say, imaginative theories alive.
It fuels that fascination, doesn't it, for researchers, historians, and people drawn to esoteric ideas and lost worlds.
It really does. It taps into that deep human curiosity about the past, about lost knowledge, the feeling that maybe there are profound secrets just beyond our grasp.
The idea that maybe these symbols hold something incredible. It's hard to resist.
It is. And, whether or not Moose has anything to do with it, the simple fact of Rongorongo existing this potentially complex writing system developed in such isolation, now completely opaque to us, it's a powerful symbol in itself.
A symbol of what, do you think?
Maybe a symbol of humanity's ingenuity, but also of how much history, how much cultural knowledge can be lost, utterly lost. It's a reminder that our understanding of the human story is probably full of gaps we don't even know are there. What does it mean for you listening now to think about that, to look at these symbols, knowing they meant something profound to someone and have absolutely no way in? It's a humbling thought.